Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Asp.Net Monsters. On today's episode, we have another special guest star. It's the one, the only, straight Julie Lerman.
You,
Welcome, Julie.
yeah,
Hey
Julie,
guys.
it's really wonderful to have you on the show without having to kidnap you and hold you hostage in a small hotel room. So this is,
I was about to say, oh, but that was so much fun. But then I realized how out of context that might sound.
it was,
So
it
maybe I
was a
should let you
little,
explain first.
yeah. Like the only room that we could find at a conference was a small kind of side
For
room.
what? Wait. Back up. For what purpose?
Oh, it was purely technologically related, and it was
We were
it was
doing this.
professional. We
Yeah,
talked about what's that?
We recorded a show.
Yeah, we were
yeah.
show for the month.
Episode
Yeah,
47.
but it was very close quarters, and there was no leaving that room if everybody wasn't on board leaving the room. So it was kind of fun. But then we had a really wonderful bike ride around. We rented some bikes and we went for a tour of Old Montreal. It was
Yep.
beautiful. Yeah.
And I showed you the restaurant that I was just dying to go eat at, and showed you where to go see the Cirque du Soleil show that I would have given my eye teeth to go see, and I didn't get to go see them. And you and your wife went to the restaurant and went to the show and said thank you
Yeah.
for making sure we had a great date.
It was much appreciated. We really appreciate it. And
Yeah,
actually,
it's awesome.
Dave was able to join us at the circus as well. So those are non-technical things, but yeah, we've got you on the show, and we've had the privilege of reading your blogs and watching your videos and seeing you live at conference and everything. But we also appreciate that there's a lot of people who are new to the stack. They might be coming from other web stacks and whatever. And if they don't know who Julie Lerman is, tell us about yourself.
Well, I've been programming for over 30 years. And can you see how gray my hair is? Yeah, I get that. I should have gray hair. What can I say? I've been programming for a long time. But programming is so much fun that my hair never turns gray because, it's stressy. Anyway, so I have lately, lately, as of, I don't know, maybe the last 10 or 15 years, I've been doing less coding for a living and more helping other teams. So coaching other teams that don't have somebody with 30 years of experience to lean on. I definitely spend most of my time in the .NET stack and am a big data nerd. I am not a DBA, but a lot of data, getting data in and out of your application. So Microsoft's entity framework, object relational mapping for that purpose is kind of my area of expertise. And I also do a lot of work with domain-driven design and kind of anything else that makes me go, oh, cool, what's that? Yeah, so that's what I do. And as you said, I live in Vermont, out in the boonies. And I wish I had gotten my big giant dog Samson down here to say hello, but he's upstairs.
Have you got snow yet out there?
We had snow, it's gone, and then we had snow, and then it was gone, and we're looking forward to real snow eventually so we can ski and snowshoe. We really love to do that. So
Well,
some
I
people are like,
know.
how do you deal with that? We love it.
I know we're going to have a brown winter up here because I bought the kids sleds for Christmas. So
Oh, no.
that's inevitably going to be brown Christmas.
But
So
you're
I
further
apologize for
north.
that. I know.
You should
We've
But
have.
also had snow and then it melted, and then we had snow
Right.
and then it
Well, it's,
melted.
it's
So
not quite that time of year for it to stick around yet. But the first snow that we had a big dump. I can't even remember how much. I mean, a big dump for, not being really winter, might have been 4 or 5 inches. My neighbor and his friend went to the ski hill, hiked up, skinned up and skied down and had an amazing day. They're pretty hardcore. I probably stayed in front of the fire with, my warming my rear up against the fire going, oh, I'm not ready for winter yet.
you're big on entity framework. So what are your feelings on entity framework and where it has come from and where it is going? Is it still fabulous? Is it still all the magic unicorns?
It actually, it just gets better and better. It's really amazing, to having been with a lot of the Microsoft stacks for a long time. It's really amazing that Entity Framework is, has been Microsoft's like key ORM, and completely valid and supported and everything like this, it's really relevant for so long because they've been evolving it. And they did a bunch of years ago, they really were looking at the original version of Entity Framework. So they had evolved from that original version, like that original code stack, from like 2007, right? And they have just been kind of adding to it and tweaking it over the years to make it better. And they said, there's so much that we want to do with it, but this code and the way the original design of it is really limiting us. So did I get all the syllables in there? Limiting, yes. I have not had my coffee yet. So what they did, rather than saying, oh, we're just going to come up with a new framework and just get rid of Entity Framework, what they did was they took Entity Framework and rebuilt it from scratch. And now they're evolving that and able to do more and more interesting things with it and keeping it powerful and modern and able to be flexible enough to kind of evolve with the times as we get, as programming evolves or as services evolve. Like just a tiny little example, Azure Cosmos DB, as I assume is a document database in Microsoft's cloud Azure. So they actually were because of how the new base of Entity Framework was designed, they are able to create a provider for an object relational mapper, right, which is for relational databases. They're able to create a provider so people could actually take advantage of that and work with Cosmos DB, right? So it's so much more flexible, and they just are able to keep evolving it. But the fact that it's been, 2008, it's 2020, right? 12 years. And it's not like, oh, it's, so hard to work with, like, the old Fox Pro apps and VB6 apps that I have to maintain still. Yeah, so that's really impressive. And they're, each iteration, they're bringing more and more great capabilities to it.
So with that getting larger and larger and adding those extra capabilities, I guess there's two sides of that. First of all, it's really componentized. They've got it's in separate packages, so you don't have to bring the whole school. You can just take the school bus when you're trying to go add data a different way. But do you think that flexibility is worth it, or is it confusing the landscape for when you're supposed to use something like a micro ORM or something that talks directly to the document database? Like, what's the story? What's the reason why you still are drawn in with EF?
So I think those questions do go together, but they also are two different kinds of issues. Thinking about micro ORM versus, Cosmos DB. So sometimes it absolutely makes sense to just have, the super lightweight thing because you're just doing something really simple. Or, another big advantages of the micro ORMs for big, the example that makes most sense to me is always Dapper, right? And Dapper was created by the team at Stack Overflow because they're dealing with enormous amounts of data and they have to get at it really quickly. So they can't, the thing about Entity Framework is it's designed to be really flexible. So, you can use kind of any database and you can have one way of querying whatever your model is and it can figure it out, right? But there's a lot of logic and a lot of work behind that and a lot of algorithms behind that to have that kind of flexibility when people need that. So Dapper, it doesn't do all that. It doesn't take a link query and then have to kind of process it and process it and process it down to a command tree that then gets sent down to, and then the provider turns it into SQL, right? And, back and forth. So there's a big advantage of that kind of one size fits all. Maybe size was the wrong word because we're talking about micro ORMs, but the fact that it can kind of handle anything. So where the micro ORM comes in, especially Dapper, because they couldn't wait for it to do all that processing and processing. So with Dapper, you actually say, no, just here's the SQL. Here's the SQL, just go execute it for me. And the ORM still has those other benefits of it takes care of making the, that redundant stuff, making the connection, creating, building the objects, executing, getting back the data. But it doesn't have to go through all of those iterations and acrobatics that Entity Framework does. Entity Framework's acrobatics, on the other hand, again, are beneficial because first of all, I can't even write T-SQL anymore. Oh my God, right? Like, so you need to know the SQL you're writing, right? Of course, people have DBAs on the team and people really are good at that. So that's also an important factor. But yeah, all that redundant work still, yeah, that's one thing they both have in common to do that. So, I am not one of those people who say, well, Entity Framework is it, and that's the only thing you should ever use and never consider anything else, right? It's, have a quiver full of the arrows and use the right tool for the right job and understand where to be flexible about that. Now, the over to the other half of this, the other part of it, let me just say, the other example that you gave was, one tool to rule them all. So, okay, now we have Entity Framework. We're going to use it to go to Cosmos DB. Why should we do that? The real reason for that is there's so many people who are already invested in Entity Framework. They really know how to use it, and they do want to do some work with Cosmos DB, and they just want to use the tool they're already using. That's really it. There's certainly more to learn and more to understand about Cosmos DB, but just from some basic stuff, it can, create the queries and materialize database and go through all that effort of creating the connection. You just give it the connection string, your credentials and everything, and it takes care of all of that for you. So it's not, if you're using Cosmos DB, then you should use Entity Framework to connect to it, right? You've got all kinds of options, right? But if you're already really knowledgeable with Entity Framework and you want to work with Cosmos DB, you can just do what you already know how to do and point it to Cosmos DB.
I like to say I have a hammer and I can use it to drive nails in, but I can flip it over, pull nails out, or I can open a coconut, right? So it just depends on. I'm just saying you can use a tool. You can use a tool in different ways, and if it makes sense, coconut in front of you, you can still use the hammer, and you're comfortable with the hammer.
Right. I get it.
I feel like that one's gonna make it into like quotables.
I had to draw it out a
I'll
little
stick
bit.
to my machete, thanks.
I think I got there.
Well, I think the bigger problem is we're also used to, when you have a hammer, everything's a nail, right?
Yeah.
So that is not at all what you were saying. Or was it? Yeah. Oh, Cosmos DB, it's just another nail, whatever. Just kidding.
It feels to me like there's a little bit of impedance mismatch on Entity Framework and Cosmos DB though, because like it's an ORM and there's no R in Cosmos DB to map. So it feels like it's gonna, but like if I'm a person who's used to using Entity Framework coming to use it on Cosmos, there's gonna be a lot of stuff that I would expect to work and then just doesn't work for me.
Well, you need to, I think it's important for people to understand what they're working with. understand about Cosmos DB, and it's also really important to understand the differences in modeling document database than relational database. So you can't have the same expectations of, tables and rows and columns and how things are broken up and all of that. So, I don't think people should just assume it's this, just because we can use Entity Framework with it, assume it's the same as any other relational database, because it's not a relational database. But that was really the big question when they first started working on it. Like, why would you need to do that? Because you've got your objects, and you can just map your object. You don't even have to map. You could just drop your objects into a document database and be done with it. So the interesting thing was, I don't know, I had in the past worked with both the in the early days, when Cosmos DB was still called Document DB, and I had worked with the .NET API for interacting with it, and I'd also worked with the Node.js API for working with it. And there's so much. What is the word? I want to say what?
Ceremony?
That is exactly the word I was looking for. I'm going, not celebrity. Right. There's so much ceremony with creating all of the infrastructure in code in order to make a query, right? You have to define a class that is a document DB object. You have to define a class that is a connection. It's not just instantiating variables. You have to build these all these things, and then and define. It's like you have a whole method that defines a query, because you have to say, okay, this is a query object, and here's the string, and here's the this and there. It's not just creating variables at all. And then with all this ceremony, just all of that goes away by just saying, oh, I'm just going to do what I already know how to do. I'm going to write a LINQ query and say, to list, and the provider will take care of all of that for you. So that for me was like, okay, I would much rather, if I already know how to use Entity Framework, I would much rather take advantage of that to make that connection. But to Simon's point, it's really important not to just go, oh, okay, it's just the same as everything else, right? Like, have an awareness of what you're working with, right? Like, you can anybody can shoot themselves in the foot with tools when they don't know, or like
with a hammer.
Yeah, if you drop the hammer on your foot.
I haven't used the EF to Cosmos DB provider, but one of the things when I think of EF, one of the advantages, I guess, of using it is that it does change tracking for me. So in the context of going to SQL Server, I might have an object graph and I make some changes to it, and I call save changes, and it just saves the things that changed, right? It updates or inserts or deletes the records that we need. But at least as of now, I don't think that Cosmos DB does partial updates on documents. So save changes is kind of an all or nothing operation at the
so it's
document level. So I'm curious about that kind of
it's kind of
mismatch, I guess.
Similar to any scenario, I think, where you're disconnected, any web scenario, because if you're disconnected. So I just did want to back up and say, I was so focused on the part of the ORM that takes care of translating, creating SQL and bringing materials back, but also, the whole change tracking, by the way, which another big thing, not using things, not understanding how things work when people have change tracking on all the time in cases where they're not using it, but they're still paying the price for it. Yeah. Anyway, so, when you're, I don't mean, as in I'm teaching you this, because I'm quite aware that you are quite aware of this. When the when the context is tracking. So if you retrieve something and the context is still paying attention, you still got the context and you make the change, then you got this nice efficient update and knows exactly what you changed, right? But more often than so, that's going to happen in client-side applications, Windows forms, things like that. Or if you're doing a lot of processing all at once on the server. But much more typically, we're dealing with disconnected objects. So we say, hey, Entity Framework, can you go get it? Entity Framework gets it and then sends it to wherever. And Entity Framework says, okay, I'm done. See ya, right? Have fun. Then that object comes back to Entity Framework, and Entity Framework has not been tracking it. There's no indication of what changed. So in that case, when you say, oh, Entity Framework, start paying attention to this and now go save it, it's like, well, okay, you said to update it. I don't know what got changed, so I'm going to update every single property anyway. So I don't think it's that different than any other disconnected situation, and you're definitely disconnected, with a Cosmos DB. So, I don't know, and I should also be clear about the fact that my experience with a Cosmos provider has only been to just look to see how it works and play with it a little bit, right? I haven't done any production work with it. So there would certainly be more that I would learn and understand about it if I was dealing with it at that level, and I haven't been.
Yeah, I've mostly been using it with the Cosmos SDKs, Cosmos DB SDKs, and you're right, there's a lot of ceremony there that I wish I didn't have to do. So definitely something to investigate, I think, on some of my projects, is see where things are at with the EF provider for it.
Cool. Yeah, and I don't even know, like I can't say what they were, but so they first gave us the Cosmos provider, the EF core team, first gave us the Cosmos provider with version 3 of Entity Framework Core, and they did do a lot. They made a lot of improvements to it for EF Core 5, but I can't tell you what those are. Not because it's a secret, it's just because, I'd have to go look them up. There were so many changes in EF Core 5. There was just so many issues that they resolved, and many of them were new features, new functionality, hundreds. Like, it's crazy. Yeah, they did so much.
Well, so that's a worthwhile update then?
Oh, yeah. Just, it, and I don't know if you knew from EF Core 2 to EF Core 3, they really did a lot of, they went down underneath and just shifted a lot of things. It's the Breaking Changes edition.
Yes, it was.
Right?
I've experienced that.
But what they were doing was saying, EF Core still has a long future, and we just need to stabilize some more things that, we don't like what's going on underneath. And so we're going to just do it all right now. Right. And you're not going to see that again. There are some minor breaking changes in from 3 to 5. And most of them are edge cases anyway. But what they were able to do was, EF Core 3, they kind of said, this is like a foundation, right, for the future. And then EF Core 5 really benefited from that work. They were able to finally do so many things they hadn't been able to before.
So 3 to 5 should be a fairly smooth transition then from 2 to 3.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. However, I still recommend that, before you do it, you go and look at that list, right? Because what's an edge case to me might be like one of the most critical things in your app, right?
Yeah, I've never done that for any other piece of software I've updated. I'm not sure I'm going to start now. I don't know why they bother
Just
with
work
those.
on that error list.
Yeah, I don't know why they have those changes on listed. Like, whatever it is, I want it. I'll take it right now. So, as well as being known as the Dave Paquette of the South, for your entity framework knowledge.
God,
You also
James,
do
can we do this across, like,
You also do a lot of stuff with DDD now, right?
Yeah,
This has
yeah.
been, I want to say it's your new thing, but I remember you tweeting about this, and it's probably like 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's been my new thing for a while. Yeah. Yeah, so DDD, domain driven design. And it's kind of a funny thing to be talking about an ORM and domain driven design, because one of the big things about domain driven design is that it has absolutely nothing to do with data persistence. And it even says, do not think about data persistence while you're solving your business problem, right? Thinking about your business software, because data persistence is secondary. It is I need you to help me think of a word again, James. It's a really important term in
He's our word guy.
software. He's our word guy. It's just, I tell you, I did not have my coffee this morning. I don't mean to say that it's secondary, but it's it's a common problem. Pardon me?
I said on the peripheral.
No,
No, that's
it's a common thing that is not special to your software, right?
Generic?
Well, no. Okay, so I feel better. Nobody knows what I'm talking about. No, there's a term for it. You say this about security, right? Like these things, they're really critical, but they're not what your business is about. My business is not about persisting data, right? So when I'm thinking about solving my business problems, I'm not going to let the problems of mapping, right, or data persistence or database schema or any of those things get in the way. They're important to address, but but they're secondary to solving my core problem. And that's what domain-driven design, the one of the key facets of domain-driven design. So yeah, it's interesting how I found that path. It's actually related to entity framework, because if anybody remembers I think we should hang up. I should go get my coffee, and then we could do it again, because my brain is just, I can't remember anything. Those when entity framework first came out, and there was a lot of people who said, what are you doing, Microsoft? Now nobody can test, nobody can use POCOs. I want to just say the anti-entity framework, but that's not what they refer to themselves as.
Oh, the alt.net group?
Guard. Yes, alt.net. Thank you. Like my friends. So they railed against the entity framework because what it did is, they were trying to share all these really, really important ideas about software design. And entity framework, actually the original version of it, just put a brick wall in between those, preventing from anybody from using EF and implementing those ideas. And of course, the other problem there was Microsoft put out a new thing. So most developers are just going to go along and follow along with it and do it. So they're like, nobody's going to be able to design software properly. So I heard a lot of that, right? But it was new to, their ideas were new to me also. And then when the next version, the second version of Entity Framework, which was called, David, what was the second version called?
Was that the Magic Unicorn one?
No, it was
EF4,
EF4,
right. Yeah.
right? So instead of EF2 and EF3. So when EF4 came out, they had POCO support, and it was possible to, have your cake and eat it too. So to follow some of these agile designs and be able to unit test and do all that kind of stuff. And so I said, okay, all you alt.net guys, now that it's here, can you use it and show me how to do those things with the entity framework? And they're like, we're not touching that. So I had to learn. So I said, okay, teach me your thing then, and then I'll figure out, I'll do it. Right. So we collaborated a lot. I learned a lot from that. And as my needle shifted, I started seeing the beauty of this way of designing software, then I was at a conference in NDC, I think, and there was Eric Evans speaking right before me, right? So like, and
Wow.
then I ended up having lunch with him or something, and and then I picked up his book, and mind blown, right? Yeah. So interest. Everybody, so many people probably think, that when I think of alt.net, if I remember the name, I always remember the name. Really, I don't know where my brain is. When I think of them, that I'd be like, oh, but if it weren't for them, I wouldn't be where I am today in terms of, it really completely changed my way of thinking. DDD definitely did. And a lot of the things I learned from the alt.net folks is just really changed the way I think about building software, approaching software design. So, I'm really, really grateful for them really, hammering on Microsoft on that.
And I think as a community, we need to thank you for showing us the examples and giving us the material to learn that in the context of EF, because like the pattern that we saw early on with EF, because that's just kind of the samples that we were given and how people learned EF, was you had a database and then you had one giant database context that represented the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know that I saw any other examples other than yours early on that kind of showed how to split that up into more manageable chunks that could be maintained
And how
long
to
term for a
think
big
about that,
application.
Yeah.
right? Not just like how technically to do it, but how to make those decisions. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I had a lot of people to thank for helping me. So yeah, I love doing that. Like, oh, I learned something. I got to tell everybody else. Right? Because why should everybody else suffer just because I did? So, but
do you-
gosh, that's what you guys do too. My goodness.
Some days. So do you feel like DDD kind of necessitates microservices, or do you think that DDD and having like a single large application with a bunch of contexts in it is fine?
Well, the first thing I want to address is DDD and microservices, right? Like, because a lot of people think they're kind of one and the same, or that microservices is the expression of DDD. And that the only reason, or DDD, the only reason to use DDD is if you're building microservices, and that's not, in my opinion, that and in the opinion of many, not really the way to look at it. However, there's so much in DDD, so many ideas and so much guidance in DDD that can help you as you're building microservices. So that's one important point. Another is that a lot of people who have been already studying DDD and are familiar with the bounded context think that there would be, it necessitates a one-to-one alignment. A bounded context is a microservice. A microservice is a bounded context. And that's not necessarily true either. It might be a good first pass, right? Would this make sense? Let's try it, right? So that's another important point. And then DB context and bounded context. Now we're kind of getting out of the microservices thing, but I think a lot of people also ask that question about, should I have one DB context per bounded context? And then I think that the best guidance for that is just consider that as like just your first stab at it, right? How does this work? How does it feel to do that? So, but you can, but not every application needs to be built from microservices, right? But again, just a lot of interesting commonalities between them, which as I said before, is why I think DDD is really great to look at when you're thinking about building microservices, breaking things down and understanding how you can separate things and then, have them communicate and how that communication works. And even that separate databases per microservice, because that's also standard guidance for bounded context. So I hope that helps. I kind of think I just said it depends like 8 times.
It
was a very consulting answer.
Sorry.
No, I think it's good because I think I'm one of those people that I feel like DDD and microservices are, well, not one and the same. I think that they're helpful to one another
Absolutely.
in the way that you build software. And certainly I agree that would always be my first pass of like, where am I going to define my service boundaries? Well, where are my domains? And then within that, I might end up splitting some, or if it turns out that a couple of services are very chatty with one another, then maybe those end up being the same service and kind of evolve it over time with that.
I could highly recommend some work by Vladek Kononov, and it's easy to find him. He's on Twitter as Vladek K, VLADIKK. He speaks at a lot of DDD events. He has had an amazing experience, with the business he works at, where they were going to, it was a very complicated business, and they were going to just take the whole thing and move it to microservices. And originally they did a microservice to DB bounded context alignment, and learned some really hard lessons, and then decided to start all over again, right, based on everything they learned. He has written fabulous articles on it. You can find, he's talked about it. So you can find those talks on YouTube, from conferences. I remember the first time I was at Kandinsky and attended that session. And, it was and not just, mind blowing, but the actual experience, right? Like real world lessons learned from somebody really understood, right? And how they took what they learned from the first iteration, right? So here are all the mistakes we made, right? And then here's what we did the second time around, and here's, what was successful. Like, it's just great. So yeah, it's just, you can start on Twitter, the Vladek K, and
yeah, we'll definitely put that in the show notes as well to look for.
And plenty of other people from the DDD world have spent a lot of time thinking about, writing about, and sharing their experiences about DDD and microservices. There's a lot of really good information out there.
One of the things that we've been, like in talking with really leaders from the community and everything, through this episode 200 journey, has just kind of been to say, okay, we've followed your journey at where you've come from, and you've seen all of the changes that have happened in your space along the way. What is the next thing that you're excited about, or do you have anything that we should be putting Vegas money on in terms of bold technological predictions?
No, I'm no mystic seer. So I am a typical person who just goes, a squirrel, right? And shiny things interest me, but I'm not future big picture thinker. I just look to see what's out there and like, oh, this is cool, I'm really interested in it, let's see how it looks. For example, I still have not really done much with big data or machine learning, right? Or AI, none of it. And I love data. Like, before we got on this call, I was in SQL Server with a client, like looking for data and trying these different queries and trying to solve, to answer a question for. That is so much fun for me. It's crazy that I haven't gotten into big data, but I think, I need a client to have me do some real work, because that's where my real experience comes from. So none of my current clients are doing that. The current clients. However, so I have to wait for something to come along that makes me like interested, and I just did a little dive into Azure Data Explorer, which is really, really interesting because it's a way to bring in huge amounts of data from disparate sources and then do a lot of analysis on them. And I know there's other tools for doing that, but Azure Data Explorer makes it easier, right? And it has all these connectors and everything. So I actually grabbed I think I took just for fun, I took an Excel file that I got from data.world. And it was list. It wasn't even big data. It was like 860 rows, but I got to start somewhere. But it was all of the challenges on every episode of American Ninja Warrior. Right? Like whatever, right? So I found that, and then I exported it to a CSV file. And then I upload. So every time I explore one thing, I learn like 8 new things too. So I uploaded it to an Azure Blob Storage. I've never used Azure Blob Storage before. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And then I open up Azure Data Explorer and I'm like, okay, I want to ingest data from this blob storage. And I just give it like the connection string, right? Boom, there, it's done. So getting the data in, and you can ingest data and have it in there, but you could also connect directly to other sources. And the Query Explorer, the online in the portal, I mean, you can use APIs and SDKs. They even have there's even an extension for Azure Data Studio. The Explorer, so it uses a special language. David, with your job, you may be familiar with this already, called Custo. So I'm just going totally off the rails here, aren't I, James? From your question.
It's
all
sorry.
right.
This is amazing. It's great.
The thing is that sometimes the things that are like sometimes people will have the 3-year view. It's not often in technology, but like what's important often is the thing that's right in front of us. That's going to be like that you can get excited about for the work that's on the road ahead of you in the next 6 months to a year too, right? So yeah,
just a couple more things about it. They created a new query language for this, and it's, first of all, I have to say the name of the original working title for this whole project was Custo, Kusto. And it was coming from a team at Microsoft in France somewhere, and it was named in honor of Jacques Cousteau because you're exploring an ocean of data. Is
I
that
did not know
awesome?
that. That's great.
So they changed the name of the product to Azure Data Explorer, but they created this query language, and the query language is called Custo Query Language, KQL. The query language is more like C# than it is like SQL, like equal signs, and so that actually is really, really interesting. Plus, it has all these pre-built functions that are amazing for doing different kinds of analysis. Like one of the functions I played with was it's a geo function where you can put in lat long and then a radius, and then it'll give you, based on your data, it'll return whatever geo data you have that is within that radius from that, right? But it's just a function, and that you just pass those variables in instead of having to figure out how on earth you would do that. So, and the online query editor also is just, it's brilliant. It's really intuitive, and so it was so much fun because I haven't worked with anything new in a little while for me. And it was so much fun to just go, oh, this is cool. And, so anyway.
Julie Lerman, Ocean Explorer.
Ocean of data.
That's great because that's the same language that they use in application insights and
It is?
searching in there. Yeah. So I'm glad to see that they're finding other uses for it because it is a really cool language.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's super powerful. Takes a bit of getting used to, but It is great.
Well, I found that again, I was using the online query editor. I did use the Azure Data Studio extension a little bit too, but it was really discoverable. That's
Mm.
another thing that I really liked about it. But do you feel the same, that it feels more like a C#, like a programming language than a query language in a funny way?
In the sense that you're using like functions and stuff to do comparisons, and yeah, it feels a little bit more like that. But then also
Yeah.
the way you pipe things, like you
Yeah,
pipe the query
and
into
how
the next
much
query, almost feels
order.
like a command line thing too. So
Mhm.
Yeah,
yeah,
because the order of those piped operations is really important. Anyway,
yeah.
so of course I needed a real excuse to look at it. So I wrote an article for Code Magazine that'll be in a future, right. Because what am I needed some, like,
Yeah.
to write it down. I needed to share it with somebody instead of just looking at it and going, oh yeah, this is cool, right? So that was kind of my impetus. Like, so I did all that, and I wrote that article. So that was fun.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we are coming up against, I think, our time limit here, but it has been so much fun having you here, Julie. We really
Oh,
appreciate you
love it.
joining us on our episode 200 extravaganza.
I can't believe we made it this far and haven't like talked maple syrup. I mean, Vermont, Canada, where
Oh, I even had a
but
joke ready about that, but I forgot what it was now.
Well, I like to buy maple syrup from my neighbors. That's all I'll say. Like literally my neighbors in my town. That's where we buy our maple syrup. We just go and buy it right from them. So that's all I'll say. Although, oh wait, I'm not talking about quality here. I mean, our quality is amazing, and as is Toronto's maple syrup production. I mean, Quebec, not
Quebec.
Quebec. I mean, Ontario, Quebec too. Yeah.
We would say Quebec. We would say Quebec.
Okay. However, it is notable that in the US, Vermont is the top like producer of maple syrup, quantity wise, and always the quality.
Mhm. I don't know that you have the same like maple syrup cartels that we have up here.
No.
Oh,
No, really, it's just, the individual kind of family farms. Some of them are bigger than others. And and then there's like the Vermont Maple Syrup Association, so they all help each other and support each other.
we have maple syrup associations, but I don't get the impression that they help each other. It's more about
Yeah.
like hoarding and being like the OPEC of maple syrup.
Yeah, no. I don't know.
And
If it was like that here in Vermont, I don't know. I'm just too naive. I just think everybody is happy and loves each other.
all right. Well, thank you everybody out there for joining us on this episode of the ASP.NET Monsters. Remember to like, comment, and share. And we will see everybody on next week's episode. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Julie.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.